Welcome back, everyone, to Figuring Out the Formula. I'm your host, Kyle, here with Patrick and Chandler, as always. This is the Belgian Grand Prix, and what a race, boys. Cheers to a great weekend.
Cheers. What a full race weekend, a sprint weekend. I get a double dose of everything.
Yeah, like Chandler said, it was a sprint weekend. We got to see the useless sprint shootout, or some people did. The three of us were asleep. It was 6 a.m. Eastern time, so no one's watching that. But anyways, like I said, great weekend. But moving into the weekend, there was a little bit of drama. Chandler, I know you're not an Alpine guy. As a McLaren fan, you just can't root for them. That's normally who we're competing against, but I think they're competing against themselves right now. What's going on with Alpine before the race?
Yeah, so we got this bombshell dropped on us. I think it was Tuesday. So really 36 hours before the teams are all locked and loaded and in like on site, got the notice that Alpine, the way it was worded was that the team principal, Otmar Schaffnauer, and the sporting director, Alan Pern, I'm not going to say the last name because I don't know how to pronounce it, but I just don't remember exactly. But it's like Permain or Permine or anyhow, Otmar, team principal, number one man in charge, would be, quote, leaving Alpine. That's how it was presented in the one-line headline. You look in and read the article and the statements. It says that they agreed to part ways, a.k.a. somebody was getting the boot, get out of here. And same with the sporting director. And then also what didn't get a whole lot of attention is the chief technical officer for Alpine. I believe his last name was Fry. He also was part of this cleaning house reboot. However, within 30 minutes of this announcement being made, Williams and James Vowles at Williams actually had hired him to be the chief technical officer. Of course, he's got to serve what in the sport of Formula One we know is gardening leave, basically of they don't want you to go straight to another team and bring all the secrets from what teams you're competing with. Got to sit out basically till either the end of the year or maybe a full year from whenever you get leave the team. But anyhow, a couple of things of that is honestly, like even as someone who's not an Alpine guy, Otmar has only been there this is his second year. And I do love the comment he made too, is that he was kind of like from his side, and I kind of understand it, is that these changes, don't happen overnight. And he said, and I quote, "You can't go get 9 women pregnant and expect a baby in a month."
What a banger.
What a lie.
Banger.
I mean,
we're way out there.
Shots fired.
There's some validity to that too. I mean, look at what James Vowles in his first year at Alpine's doing. I mean, or Williams is doing it. He's not afraid to say, like, look, this is like we have bare bones. It's going to take some time. So I say that as like I feel like it's a little bit of a quick trigger, but then you think about what happened a month ago. The Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney purchase, the owners of Wrexham and the It's Always Sunny and movie star. They purchased I believe it was right at 25% stake in Alpine. So there's a lot more money and investment in Alpine coming in. So I think there was some pressure. I don't know if it was from them directly, but maybe the folks that are seeing this valuation increase in Alpine are a little bit trigger happy and want to see something. And now, who are they going to replace them with? That's where I think we go from here. Is where do we go from here?
Williams, we all saw Williams' floor. What'd you call it, Pat? A smooth brain floor? Like,
yeah,
it's just not. It's not going to work. And if Williams just pushed James Vowles out of here fast as Alpine did, it would never work. So Alpine, this is their first year with 2 veteran drivers with Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly. Pierre Gasly is a race winner.
Yes,
and he's had podiums. So to not trust. I don't know.
They're just a mess, dude. They're just a mess is all it is.
Now, and we kind of like, you can look back and some people have said you kind of saw the writing on the wall with like, first off, Fernando, or even back to when it was the Renault days of,
Cyril
they brought in like Daniel Ricciardo and said, we're going to build this car around you. And after like a year and a half, he's leaving for McLaren.
Yeah.
So he saw something that like he didn't like, or Zach Brown's just really good at drawing him away. Okay, so then you got Fernando Alonso coming out of retirement. That's great. Fernando Alonso is, at this time last year, we're like, why would anybody leave Alpine for Aston Martin? Look what Aston Martin A did at the beginning of the year, but B, like, okay, that's two veteran drivers that have left and bolted. So is there something higher up? Maybe they're just, they're using Otmar as a scapegoat, and then all these technical officers and stuff. And then final point on that I do want to make is going back to the technical director going from Alpine to Gardner leaving is going to be at Williams. Did not know this. This is Williams' first chief technical officer, CTO. This is their first CTO since 2019. So they had someone like one of their previous ones left in 2019. They just never hired anybody new. So we're like, we said it in a group text. No wonder the floor is flat. I mean, we have no.
Yeah.
So, and you talked about the McLaren and the Williams, like.
That boy got a stimmy during COVID and was like, yeah, nah, I ain't coming back.
Exactly.
Sorry, we ain't doing this.
Yeah. And it's like, so we talk about the McLaren versus the Williams, and both saying it takes time. McLaren had some infrastructure and has a long history and like still has money coming into it. I was like, Williams is starting here. But
the craziest part about this whole storyline isn't that he's gone already, right? Like Alpine has not done well. But what's crazy is that they announced it 3 days before a race weekend, when this is the Belgian Grand Prix is literally their last race of the first half of the season. It's about to be summer break, which is a month-long break for everybody, every worker, so why not wait 5 more days? What is the point of that?
It's just a big, I don't know. I think that Alpine is just full of egos. I know last year.
What do you expect?
Yeah, and last year you had Alan Prost, who he was, I don't know if he was like the CTO or what he was doing for Alpine for a couple years before he got the boot. But he had been saying that their old CEO, I forgot his name. It's like Rossi or something. Laurent Rossi, maybe.
He's still the CEO. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was basically saying that, they just make all these decisions that are all just political and stuff like that and expect, totally unrealistic results all the time.
I mean, Formula One's a business, right? And these higher ups, they're the CEOs, they're the board level executives who, as long as they're making money, they don't care.
Exactly.
And if that means Renault is making money in their commercial vehicles because they have an Alpine team, it was a mistake to release it. Like, as someone who's studying PR, it's a mistake to release that before race weekend. Wait till a break happens. Wait till a huge silly season thing happens. This might be the huge silly season thing, but I mean, some driver's going to sign. Well, as soon as a driver signs and it makes news, then you put that out. Hey, he's gone. Okay. Well, who cares? Our favorite driver just got signed over here. Why would they not do that? Instead, the whole weekend was about, like, we'll talk a little bit later. One of the sprint top finishers was an Alpine. So, but that wasn't the actual storylines. It was Otmar's last race. Like, it's not fair to the driver. It's not fair to the team. So
I agree. And it's also, to go back one last thing, if you made me think of something, Patrick, when you say their decisions are very political, I looked it up, confirmed. So Renault is actually the majority stakeholder in Renault is the French national government.
Yep.
It is like they own, I think, 19.3% on.
I mean, I didn't mean quite like that political,
like literally political.
Yeah, it's not literally political.
So I say that now of like, now it's going to be interesting. Like, you're going to have the French national government, and you're going to have freaking Deadpool owning this F1 team. Who's going to win? If you've got Ryan Reynolds and his group owning 25%, and now is he going to tell the French to kiss his ass for something like that? Like, well, I mean, this is to me,
that would be the most Deadpool thing ever. So yeah.
It's like
to suck his beignet.
We have Wrexham. We have Welcome to Wrexham. Now we're just going to have the Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey Alpine show on FX. I just
honestly, I don't know what they're doing. They need to get their heads out of their rear ends. That was pretty much all the drama that happened before the race weekend actually begun. We move into the actual practice session, and it was raining. It wasn't. It was raining pretty damn good. I mean, farmers, you love to see it. Motorsports fans, you hate to see it. The amount of rain that came down at Spa, the racetrack in Belgium that they were racing at, was, I mean, it was enough to remind us all of Imola, because I really thought they were going to either cancel the race or the qualifying session, the sprint race, something. There were talks all weekend long about, if it keeps raining like this, we're not doing this. Chandler, I know there was like talk about like the dangers of Spa. Can you explain a little bit about why Spa is so dangerous?
Yes. So kind of from a history standpoint is we have seen some of the worst, and I'm going to say worst in a couple different ways, the worst wrecks and incidents in the motorsport, Formula One, in terms of like largest amount of crash. Look at 1998, where I believe it was lap one. Like half the field took each other out, and it really just one person loses control, and then A, you can't see. B is that that person that's slinging around everywhere doesn't know what's going on. Like they can't control where they're going, and so other people are kind of pinballing into it. B, because of we've lost a couple of drivers in this specific track alone during the wet. It was a Formula 2 race in 2020, F2 race coming out of Eau Rouge and Rodillion. Those two turns that are very fast, but also part of that is the way it's at the bottom of a hill. You can bottom out, and also when you throw rain in the mix, you really lose control, and it's so fast that we saw it with this wreck where basically he lost control. He hit the wall. That's not what the problem was. The problem was when he hit the wall, the barrier kicked him right out in the middle, and somebody else on a flyer T-boned him right to the side, killed him instantly. The reason this was as big, that's obviously in 2020 that happened, awful tragedy. In 2021 and 2022, we'd kind of always had this on our mind. I don't know I can't remember the exact feeder series, but there was a motorsport series that was racing here at Spa probably about a month ago. It was during the weekend of a Formula One race because it got mentioned in one of the covers. I cannot remember which weekend it was, but we actually lost another driver in a very similar incident at the same corners, because similar situation, gets in the wall, gets pushed back out into the track, full speed, somebody head on to him. So it's ever present on all drivers' minds. They actually have the biggest thing that we saw was that, we're putting the pressure on you, the FIA. If the weather is bad enough, we do not want to race this race, and we're going to put the pressure on you to make that call.
Well, it turns out they had good reason. Like I said, it was pouring rain during the practice session. So this weekend, since it was a sprint weekend, there was only one practice session. During that practice session, it did nothing but rain. Half the cars didn't even leave the garage. No time set. Half of them went out for an out lap and then came back in just to see where the water was pooling up, that kind of thing. My question for you guys is, why does Formula One not have like the air dryers like NASCAR does, right? I'm not asking for a dry racetrack, but I saw they had a sweeper out there sweeping water. That doesn't really do anything. If it's standing water, the sweeper, it can't handle that much water that was on the track. Now, the air dryers that literally have a jet engine on the back blowing the water to the side of the track, if you keep going back and forth, yes, it will dry the track. But Formula One, if they had one of those on the track, then it would have been perfectly fine. I think that they could have gotten a lot more practice done, and moving forward through the weekend, there would have been a lot more running of the cars. Pat, do you have any idea why they do not use the air dryer instead?
Because of the way the tracks are designed, they, in theory, don't need it.
If the tracks don't need it, right? We saw like there were drains clogged throughout the weekend, that there was literally pools of water where drivers, they just couldn't run because of it. One pass of the air dryer blows all that shit off the track. It's still a wet track, right? Like it's not like we're getting rid of wet racing. Like that's still a thing. But now you don't have standing water, which causes hydroplaning or aquaplaning or whatever the Europeans call it. But it's way safer to have that than just sweeping a a little bit of the water off.
Well, and I'll say it too, is that you take a look at it. So the longest NASCAR track we have on the circuit is 2 2/3 miles long. And they usually have Talladega will have 3 or 4 jet dryers kind of moving along slowly to take it. So it takes a lot of that. Spa this weekend is the longest track on the calendar, but it was over 4.5 miles long. So, for even if it was one, you could stick it in one spot, but then it's like how much effort you spend on it.
The NASCAR takes that long because they're drying the track. I'm saying you blow the standing water off the track.
That's fair.
You're going to have pools of water that we saw at the bottom of the hills, in the corkscrews or some of the chicanes, there was standing water. You don't have to go that slow to blow the water off the track. Once you blow it off the track, it keeps moving. I don't know. I think that would be a lot safer and it would be a lot more efficient, like for the FIA, for Formula One, to have one of those or multiple of those in order to keep the racing moving forward. Because no one wants to see, we'll talk about this in a second, no one wants to see qualifying or sprint race being delayed because of the rain or the standing water, if you will, right? Rain, we race in the rain, no problem. But it's the standing water that they delayed everything. Why? If you had one of these machines, it's over with. But we move into qualifying session. It started raining in Q1. It was really wet. Like I said, standing water, that's just going to be the theme of this weekend. That's what McLaren thought. McLaren had set up their car to be running in the rain all day, every day during this race weekend. Pat, the difference between Red Bull and McLaren was night and day. What exactly was the difference between the two cars, and why did we see one be more successful in their setup than the other?
So the main, the main difference that, at least I think a lot of people saw from the photos that were published, was if you looked at the wings of both the Red Bull versus the McLaren cars, because it's set up to divert a lot of water, the McLaren cars had basically super high end plates, very steep front wing, very steep rear wing, which produces more drag and downforce. But in a circuit like Spa, where half the track is one giant straight, that's not going to help you in the long run. Whereas Red Bull, I think they kind of just gambled and were like, well, if it rains, we'll make it work, but we're just going to bring the regular stuff anyways. And they basically just had it set up to excel on the straights, and let the floor do the rest of the work on the back end of the track where you have a lot of tight turns. And McLaren's
this
not
was
crazy.
Red Bull. This was Red Bull's wing right there.
It really wasn't that crazy of a move by McLaren. I mean, we've had multiple instances in the past few years where it really did pour every day, and that could have been the forecast that they saw. And a track like this, where it's literally in the middle of the Ardennes forest, like it rains often. Like almost every year there is rain.
They actually moved it up the Belgian Grand Prix into July instead of August, because August has the most rainfall, and then we ended up getting 2 out of 3 days was pouring rain here.
Yeah.
So
it is wild how you think back in history, and it's like in my recent limited of being in F1 for 3-4 years of and then going back and seeing the highlights of old races at Spa, it's like, has it ever not rained during a Spa race?
That's what it feels like here. Like when the 4th of July comes around, it's like, are you going to go see fireworks? Nah, it's going to be raining. I just know it. You know what I mean? But out in Q1 was Hülkenberg, Ricciardo, Logan Sargent, Zhou, and Alex Albon. A lot of people weren't really talking about Daniel Ricciardo this week. I mean, he out-qualified and out-finished his teammate last weekend. This weekend in the Q1, like I said, he qualified 19th. Well, he actually qualified 6th to move into Q2, but his lap time got deleted. Now, me and Pat were talking about this, like, how the hell do you get your lap time deleted at this track? That's what I said. And then Pat enlightened me into the fact that these are some of the highest speed corners in the world. And it's like, well, okay, I can see how you can get this much over the line.
I mean,
okay.
It's very surprising because if you look at the hill going up Yo Rouge into Radillon, it's like you'd think, oh, it's straight. They just have to hold their wheel, but it's actually a very hard turn to take.
Oh, believe me. What?
Oh, Chandler was shaking his head like I was saying something crazy. But it was.
Well, no, you were saying you just think that it's something you can just hold it straight, and I'm going, nope.
Oh yeah, yeah. But
I know exactly what Kyle was about to say, and I was about to say the exact same thing.
Yeah, going up that hill, it's hard as hell. If anybody out there has never tried it, I highly recommend trying to play like Assetto Corsa or something on like a nice steering wheel. And then you'll feel really how it is going up that hill. It's not easy at all.
Bro, it doesn't matter if you're on a fucking controller. It doesn't matter because literally I miss that turn every time. I'm always off at least one side or the other. Like,
yep,
buddy, I'd have the white and black flag. It would be terrible every lap. Delete,
and the signature
delete.
bottoming out too just really adds to it. Of just you're like you feel the bump, and then it's like, oh god,
yeah.
no.
I mean, there's so much force going through it that if you look, it doesn't happen often. But if you looked this weekend, there's literally resin from the skid plates on the bottom of the cars that was just stuck to the track.
Dang. That kind of sucked. I was really excited to see that lap time for Danny. Like I said, Q1 it was still raining. Q2 on the other hand, the rain kind of stopped. It started wet. It wasn't raining, but it was a wet track in Q2. But at 6.5 minutes left in the session, everybody wanted to put on slick tires. It sped up so fast to where you had to put on slicks or you're done. You know, the slick, like I said, the slicks come on with 6.5 minutes left. And one person didn't get the memo that slicks make you race better, faster, stronger, whatever else Kanye West says in his song. Esteban Ocon really sending Otmar out with a good old fuck you, right? He decided to do some rebranding of the track. He took off a handful of the Rolex signs that were on the wall. Just absolutely fucked it up. He ran right into the wall, bent it. He managed to keep the car moving, keep it going, but it had extensive damage. Pat,
yeah, he gave it a nice shave of the wall.
Yeah.
Honestly, I was surprised his front wheel just didn't crumple in at the angle he came in at. But I mean, it was pretty comical just watching all of the advertising boards just slowly get shaved off like fresh pastrami or something.
Like the gabagoo.
Yeah. And then everyone else was like, oh yeah, no, this turn's fine. And Ocon's like, nah, hold my beer, brother.
The funny thing is Max Verstappen did the same thing in the same qualifying session where he kind of got loose a little bit. Like his car did the little shimmy shake. And Max is a good driver, so he didn't crash. He didn't even go off. He went off like one wheel and then was
Ocon
back
should
on the
just
track.
be better. That's all it is. Just be better, bro.
Yeah, I get. That's what Ryan Reynolds told him. Dude,
just
you try being better. No, but out in Q2 was, like I said, Esteban Ocon, Bottas, Magnussen, Gasly, and Yuki Tsunoda. So Yuki, he actually outqualifies his teammate, right? Well, he had to because lap time got deleted for Danny Rick in Q1. But regardless, that was a nice qualifying effort from the AlphaTauri. Moving into Q3, this event was back to the old ways. There wasn't tires like, last week there was, hard tires in Q1, mediums Q2, softs in Q3. No, this one was back to you choose what you want, put it on there and let it ride. Well, the positions that come out of Q3 were in first, Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc in second, and then in third was Checo Perez. We said Checo needed a good finish, and he finally qualified top 5, so that works out great. So the thing is, Max Verstappen was taking his 5th gearbox of the season, which means he gets a penalty, a 5-place grid penalty. So even though he got pole position during qualifying, he's going to not start on the pole. So before we jump into the actual race and the sprint and all that, let's jump into Pat's paddock. You can explain a little bit about like what's going on with the gearboxes, the motor, like all these components that you get penalties for. Like, what's the point of that?
Yep. So welcome back to Pat's Paddock, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about allocated components. So throughout an F1 season, every car is given an allocated pool of both engine and gearbox components. Essentially, this pool, there's different parts throughout, the engine that teams will change out for any given weekend. They'll have some for qualifying, some for practice, and then some for the actual race. But this was actually instituted earlier in the 2000s as teams would essentially just put in a new engine or gearbox for every single session that they would run, and then maximize the power that they were outputting and just burn through the engine at max power, which, as you guys can imagine, can become insanely costly for teams. So the way it works is that teams can swap out their components in the allocated pool as much as they want. So if you say you want to run engine 1 in qualifying in 1 week, and then engine 2 for the race, and then the next week you want to run engine 2 for qualifying and engine 1 for the race, you can do that as long as you don't exceed the limits for the various components. Now, the way that the FIA checks this is, one, the teams report it anyways to the FIA, but they also actually have seals on various parts of the engines, so the teams can't fake it and get around it and essentially
They
cheat.
wouldn't do that. That would be cheating.
No, F1 teams would never.
No.
F1 teams would never. So the penalty for extra engine parts is a 10-place grid penalty, and then the penalties for gearbox components are 5. The allocations for the parts are as follows. For the internal combustion engine, the MGUK, the MGUH, and the turbocharger, you get 4 of those each. For the battery and the control electronics, you get 2 of those. You get 8 exhaust components. And then for the gearbox casing, you get 4 of those. And for the actual internal driveline and gear changing components, you get 4 of those as well. So this week, we saw Max Verstappen, who he changed the main assembly of his gearbox and exceeded the limit. And so that's why he took 1 5-place grid penalty. What we'll most likely see at both Zandvoort and Monza in the coming weeks is you'll see a number of drivers taking, 1, 2, 3, like multiple of these penalties, and they'll get like a 15, 20 place penalty. It's just because, teams can't run these engines forever. And if everybody else is switching their stuff out, you might as well do the same thing as well. Now, the way this works, if let's say, you and someone else take a bunch of different penalties for different parts, and then you would both start out in, say, like 21st place in theory. Mm-hmm. What happens is after that is the tiebreaker is whoever qualifies faster. So if, Charles Leclerc takes 10 penalties and Max Verstappen takes 10 grid place penalties, but Charles Leclerc qualified faster, he would start ahead of Max, which will never happen. So let's come back to reality.
Yeah, okay. That was a terrible example, but we get what you're saying.
Very intellectual up until that point, right?
Yeah, now it's like right over.
Like, it's called a hypothetical for a reason.
Okay, what
we normally will see these at Spa a lot. This year we actually didn't have anybody but Max, I think, that did this. So at Zandvoort and Monza, definitely expect to see a lot of drivers do this, and it's going to get pretty confusing after qualifying when it's like you qualified somewhere, but you're actually starting behind someone who qualified slower than you.
So my thing is, right, before we move into the sprint part of this race weekend, you get into the grid place penalties, and Formula One right now is exploding across the world, mainly because of Drive to Survive. That's how we started with this, right? That's why we are focusing this podcast on people new to the sport. Well, when you have to explain all that kind of like grid penalties and that kind of thing, why would Formula One and the FIA not just give more opportunity? Like, you get more components, right? I'm not asking for 25 engine components, right? I'm just saying, why would they not do a couple more like a couple more elements, right? Just if everybody on the grid is taking a penalty for this one component, maybe they should probably have more of that component, right?
So the main reason for that, like the way they essentially decided on these allocated limits, is because not all teams make their own engines in the first place, and so they quite literally cannot afford to actually, turn the engines to a higher power and then just use them faster. But we bought 3, 4, 5 more engines, whatever it is.
I get that, and I'm not saying you take your 5 or your 4 engine components. I'm saying you have 6, right? Yes, it's going to be a little more expensive. You can raise the budget cap, whatever it is, but if they're already using those engines anyways, and they're just taking a penalty along with every other team, why would they not just raise it, right? And create, like, keep the natural racing element of you qualify faster than someone, that's your position, right?
I think it's literally purely just a monetary move for like the smaller teams that are actually buying the engines.
But they're the ones they also get penalties for replacing shit too, right? It's not like Williams is not going to get any penalties for more components.
They do as well, but the thing is like, okay, say you have Mercedes and Williams. Mercedes is building this engine and then most likely profiting off selling these engines to Williams, thereby automatically giving them a further advantage, both monetarily and technologically, than a smaller team.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Well, that was Pat's Paddock, everyone. That was very informative. I didn't even think about the actual parent teams, the teams that provide the engines, that kind of thing, to the midfield back markers, that kind of thing. That's something that it's just teams to me, right? Like, you have 10 teams, 20 drivers, they have this many components. Why not increase the number? Well, that's why, because these huge teams are going to make a lot more money, giving them more advantages in the future. I understand it now. Pat's Paddock, thank you. We move into the sprint race. We're going to skip the sprint shootout, like we said earlier. Ain't no one watched that. Some of us watched the highlights on YouTube. Shout out to YouTube. Appreciate it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe at Figuring Out the Formula. But anyways, moving into the sprint race, I thought the sprint race was way better than the actual race. Did you guys both watch it, I assume?
Yeah.
I went back and watched the highlights. I was not able to watch the.
Some of us are more dedicated than others. Chandler's
a slacker.
Yeah, Chandler was too busy getting drunker than a skunk in a trunk, I guess.
I went to 7 breweries and not a single one of them had F1 on, and it really made me mad. I figured an eclectic town like that would have some place for it.
Let's be real, Chandler. Even if they did have F1, would you have even understood what you were looking at?
Yeah.
No. Doubt.
For the viewers out there, comment.
I am pressing X to doubt right now.
I would have been preaching to everybody about what is happening right now.
Yeah, that would have been Mary Margaret, not you. But but anyways, you guys comment if you think Chandler actually would watch the race if it was on TV at a brewery, or if you think he would just talk. Yeah, we'll see. But so comment down below if you think he actually did that shit or not. But in the race weekend, in this sprint race, it was raining the entire time, right? It actually was delayed. I talked a little bit earlier about how it was delayed because of the standing water. It was delayed over an hour due to the extreme pooling. We've had broken drains on the track that caused water to flood, and it was just too much for the drivers. They talked earlier about like the drivers union talking to the FIA about, we're not racing if it's not safe. The FIA made a call and said, nope, it's going to be a little later. We're going to wait till it stops raining or slows down at least and sweep some of this water off the track. They could use the air dryer a lot quicker, but they didn't. They used a sweeper and it worked eventually. The pit strategy, though, that came into play once it did start. So for the sprint shootout, you had Oscar Piastri. He was in the top 3, and Lando Norris was right next to him, trying to figure out what's going to happen with the pit strategy, right? So they were forced to start on full wet tires, Pat. When you move from full wet tires to intermediates, you gain a shit ton of speed. The question was for the teams, do you go the first lap right into the pits and put on intermediates, or do you run a lap and then put on intermediates? Well, this is not going to be a standing start, right? It's going to be behind the safety car and then just like a safety car restart, right? Like it's single file. You can't pass before the checker flag. Can't do anything. You're just riding along until the leader goes. Pat, do you think that this start was the correct start formation for the weather, or would you have liked to seen a standing start?
So I definitely think that it was the right decision. At least we didn't have the same situation as 2 years ago where, they just drove around for the laps behind the safety car and called it a race.
Yeah. Shout out George Russell.
And, something about the tires that F1 uses is that those wet weather tires are also designed to just shoot as much water as possible out of the sides of them. Obviously, this is one so that the drivers maintain grip, but it too helps to dry off the track. And they did, I think it was like 1 or 2 laps maybe behind the safety car, which actually displaced a lot of the standing water that was out there.
It was 4.
Oh, it was
4 or 5.
Okay.
Yeah, it was 4 or 5 because they kept talking about like what's going to be what's considered a formation lap and what is going to actually be.
Okay.
So they shortened the sprint from 16 laps to 10 or 11 because they ran 4 or 5 laps.
Okay, that makes sense. But yeah, the tires are essentially just designed to expel the water, and since it actually started to stop, or I guess it stopped raining, there wasn't anything else coming down, and so it just all the cars going in the same line actually created a pretty dry line relatively quickly. And coming off the start, you saw about half the drivers go into the pits immediately and switch to inters, and then half of them stayed out. And I think literally by the time Max stayed out and was already up Yo Rouge, he was immediately just telling his team like, "Hey, we need to like box. The pace is not here. This is too dry already." And he can already tell that inters were the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're so close to each other, right? Because it is a safety car restart that you can't double stack, basically. Like if you double stack your 2 cars,
you're ruining the second car.
The second car is screwed. So what McLaren did was the leader, it was Lando at the time, said, all right, you're going to keep on your flying lap. Like once it goes green, you're going. And then when you get the first chance, Oscar, come into the pits, get intermediate tires. Well, we've talked in the past about the overcut, undercut, that kind of thing. This is a prime example of the undercut working, right? So Pierre Gasly, Oscar Piastri, who else did it work for? There were a couple other drivers that came in immediately and got the intermediate tires. They jumped up multiple positions. Well, Max Verstappen, like he said, couldn't just go into the pits, right? Like if he went into the pits and people stayed out, he could lose the lead, that kind of thing. So being the leader, Max stayed out, and then Oscar came out in front of him. So Oscar is the first Formula One rookie in over 10 years to lead a lap. That's pretty awesome, right? Like we talked earlier about McLaren having prepared for the rain this weekend. This played right into their hands. It was perfect. There was no better way, right? Eventually, Oscar gets passed by Max. It's Max Verstappen, right? Like there's a reason we don't allow, like the 3 of us aren't picking Max every week. Like I changed the rules to where you can't pick Max Verstappen to win anymore. That's because he's unstoppable this season. The big point to talk about is Oscar Piastri.
So Oscar, we've seen come alive. Not just like it's when McLaren had upgrades again. Lando had been getting some points during the year. But these upgrades, obviously they help Lando because he got two podiums, 2 P2s in a row in races. But I have not seen someone come alive with an upgrade, as a driver come alive with an upgrade like Oscar has with these upgrades. The man is killing it right now. He's got 34 points, and take out Australia, which I think he had 4 points. So 30 points have all come since like starting with the Canada race. And that includes, I mean, not to jump ahead to our race, but looking at a sprint race in Spa, then you've got the race in Hungary, Spain, Canada, and Silverstone. So you've got 5 like points, like awarding events, and my man's averaging 6 points a pop on that. And like it is just, it's good to it's good to see. I don't know, like some people say that there are some pundits out there who are saying that like Oscar is really good, but is also replaceable. Like you can have some other drivers, but I also think it's too soon to see a rookie do this. Is really good. Now, is he like, obviously we have our Max and Lewis and all that stuff, but Max and Lewis both will be the first to say that like Lando Norris is like championship driver material. Like,
well, second, because I said it first, but we'll disagree. Yeah,
I'm not no journalist. I'm not crediting who said it first, but people are saying that, and it's obviously in a rookie year. It's too soon to say something like this, but could we see Oscar turn into like two? You get McLaren the right tools, and if they strike fire, and I really don't think they're going to track down Ferrari, but they can at least make it close and be clear and cut 5th place and really say, okay, well, for the first third of the season, we were driving a tractor around. Like a John Deere could have beat us in a 40-yard sprint. But you get that and you get the right, right ingredients, and we really could see something with McLaren coming up. Who knows what happens in 2026?
We continue the sprint race journey, and Fernando Alonso, veteran, has come out of retirement, multi-world champion, and he spun the car around. Track was still wet, but spun it out right into the gravel. Caused a safety car during the sprint race, and I mean, he didn't hit anything. I don't know if he was stuck. He literally, as soon as his car came to stop, he just got out. It was his birthday, so and the race did start an hour late. So my working theory is that he just had reservations.
He was ready for shots, bro.
And he
wanted himself a Belgian baddie lined up for him.
Just one? Come on. It's Fernando. But he had T-Swift chilling with him, like he's on his Eras tour too. It's just happy birthday, Fernando, but it is what it is. He's allowed a bad race every now and then. I mean, the dude is literally in third in points right now. So it happens, right? But
it happened in a sprint race.
Yeah. What I'm tired of talking about is stupid ass speeding penalties in the pits. These cars literally have limiters to where you click it on and it limits the car to the speed that it can go for the pit lane, right?
Mm-hmm.
Logan Sargent in the sprint race gets a 5-second time penalty for speeding in the pits. 1, how do you lock up the brakes? And 2, how do you get a speeding penalty when you have a rev limiter on there for the pit lane, right? Like this guy is not competing for any position. So what is the point of him why are you pushing that hard? Like you're not getting points. So what are we doing here?
He's doing his best Sebastian Vettel impression and trying to race through the pit lane, but you honestly don't see it often where like someone gets a penalty because they just broke late. Like it'll happen once every odd number of races. But yeah, Logan Sargent, it's like, bro, you're literally like you're not going to catch anybody, dude. I don't know what he was doing.
That's the American in him.
It's got to be, because it's kind of embarrassing. Like, how do you get a 5-second time penalty speeding in the pit lane and you're still bottom 5?
Yeah.
Like, if you're going to speed, you might as well be the first place finisher. You might as well be Max Verstappen, right? Max gets a penalty just to see if he's close to anyone. I don't know. The thing is, Max Verstappen, everyone knows he's going to win. Everyone knows he outqualifies everybody. His teammate Checo Perez, he had an interesting sprint race, right? So, Patrick, Checo and Lewis Hamilton had a little scrap, if you will. Can you explain what happened a little bit with that?
Yeah, so I can't remember exactly what turn it is. I want to say it's like 11 or 12. It's somewhere towards like the back third of the track. Um, Checo was honestly just slow in the sprint race, just flat out slow. He's never really been good with wet conditions at all. And Lewis was quickly hawking him down and coming around one of the later turns towards the very last straight of the track. Lewis actually ends up getting side by side with Checo, and coming into the turn, I think Lewis understeers and basically just punched a nice little hole in Checo's side pod, of which after that he pretty much tumbled down the order. Pretty much everybody passed him, and then they retired the car.
Yeah. The hole in the car was pretty significant. We'll talk in a little bit about another car that also had the same situation, basically. Lewis Hamilton was given a penalty, though, for that contact. There were screenshots and debates all across Twitter and Reddit and all this stuff. Typical Mercedes fans, they're going to always, Lewis Hamilton's always right, correct? In this situation, I think he was, right? Like, he was given a penalty for this contact, but he had the lane, he had the position. Checo just didn't give him enough room, right? So I don't understand why he was given this penalty. I honestly, like, he had the position, right? Like, it was his lane at that moment in time where he was.
And we've talked about it. These are some of the fastest corners too that we'll see on the track. And I really think it's a racing incident. And I also, you talk about how you think he was right is, we've talked about it before when we're looking at investigating an incident. Used to be you'd have the race director who would just make the decisions right there. Now it is that the race director and race control, if they decide, hey, this might need to be looked at, they'll hand it over and the stewards will decide. One of the stewards went into the paddock and someone was talking to him, and they said, we don't really I'm one of the Mercedes folks, so we don't really agree with what you as the stewards gave. And he just goes, you have to remember, he goes, there are 4 stewards in that room. And I can tell you right now, he goes, that not all 4 of them agreed on what that penalty, if that should have been a penalty or not. So
see, why the fuck are there 4? But why are there 4 people making that determination, right? You said last week, what was it, Pat? That
they penalize the action, not the result.
If one person is in charge of giving out the judgments, the penalties or not, then that person is actually more accountable than 4. We don't know of those 4 who made a decision to penalize Lewis or not, in my opinion. But
I don't agree with that. The problem with having one person make that decision is it's quite literally like a court case where you get either a good judge that has the same beliefs as you or a bad judge. And I think with having 4 stewards, I guess I don't know if that's like the standard for a race or not. It reduces the partiality, because if one steward is suddenly like, oh hey, I kind of like Lewis more, and then one's like, oh, I kind of like Checo more. I definitely think it reduces the partiality. Now, I don't agree with their decision on this one. I don't know why.
How about this? How about this, Pat? I agree with what you're saying to have 4 instead of 1, but I think they need to have the same 4 every race weekend.
Yeah,
because if they keep changing it up, we've talked in the past about inconsistency. If they keep the same 4, I am perfectly fine with that, because then the judgments will be more consistent.
Right.
If they change those 4 people up every time, that shit's not going to be consistent.
Yeah. And that's the thing that I think a lot of F1 fans have a problem with, is that there is not consistency. Like, me personally, at this point, I'm like, what the hell is a racing incident then? Yeah. And it's like, okay, Lewis understeers into Checo. That is, in theory, an error on Lewis's part. But I mean, it's not like he dive bombed into the corner that he just was never going to make or something like that. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was already alongside going into the corner. And so I don't like that result. I honestly don't think that's worth a 5-second penalty. But maybe me personally, I just need to see more consistency so I really understand what's a racing incident versus causing a collision.
Yeah, 100%. Once you, as a fan, can see an incident and be like, boom, it's just an incident. Or, like Charles Leclerc said when he was a kid, just an incident. Or you can see it and say, okay, that was inadvertent. They both were on the same line, ran out of real estate. Okay, whatever. But when you can't make that determination watching live, like that's not right, because you just know the system is flawed. The system was not flawed for Max Verstappen though. He ended up winning the sprint race. In second place, Oscar Piastri, our boy. He came home in second place. Like I said, he led some laps, but it is what it is. He's not really going to win that race. He doesn't really stand a chance against Max Verstappen. After the safety car, he had a good restart, in my opinion, but the Red Bull is just too fast. With no DRS, it still just sailed right past him. Finishing in third place was Pierre Gasly, though. Pierre, his friend, like we talked earlier, had tragically died at the track, handful of years ahead of this race. And he wrote on a note before the race weekend started, said, this is for you, or something along those lines, right? He ended up giving him a top 3 finish in the sprint race. So I know he's very proud of that, as well as Otmar, right? Like Otmar wants to go out on top, right? Good finishing position, good points for the team. And he managed to do that. So I think that was cool to see the Alpine up there. As much as I am a McLaren fan and I don't like Alpine, see Pierre Gasly up on the podium again was the podium. Oscar Piastri is like, I don't know what this is, but this is cool, I guess. So that's basically how we all feel with sprint races.
And that's why I sit there. I'm perfectly okay with seeing Pierre Gasly in third, because Oscar was in second. McLaren gained some ground on or gained split the distance even more with Alpine. So you can have third place finishes as you want to, as long as my McLaren's on second.
Yeah, or first, but that was the sprint race. So I thought it was better than the actual race. The actual race, the only thing that really happened was in the first lap, right? So first lap, it was actually a dry race. So McLaren fucked. They're screwed. They planned for a wet race, and it was a dry race for the most part.
Can't be too mad at the decision. I mean,
they got decent points with Oscar's second place finish in the sprint race, but during the actual race, turn 1, I can't talk about this because this shit still pisses me off. But Pat, why don't you give us a little rundown of what happened to me and Chandler?
On it either, because it's McLaren.
Give us a little rundown of what happened, because it's me and Chandler's McLarens.
Man, I mean, this is a tale as old as time. So Oscar, I mean, he had pretty good qualifying and starting up pretty far up in the pack, and I don't think he got the best of starts, and pretty much everybody was bunching up because in the Spa racetrack, if you look at a map, you're starting at the end where there's a little point called La Source, which it's a hairpin turn. So it's very tight for all the cars to come through. Now, Oscar, right off the rip, just starts getting pushed towards the inside wall. And coming into the turn, you have Carlos Sainz Jr.
He's a smooth operator.
Not smooth operator. That shit, he left that at McLaren. Basically, I mean, he says that Lewis started to push into him and he had nowhere to go, but he basically just crunches Oscar into the wall. It immediately destroys Oscar's car and punches a hole in his own car. So Oscar was done, which Oscar surprisingly was calm as hell on the radio, but I think he was just disappointed. Then
Oscar literally got second place in the sprint race, and then not literally less than 24 hours later was out of the race with a hole in his car, a front wing fucked up, suspension broken, all because Carlos Sainz locked up his wheels and slid right into him.
Yeah.
My thing is, Pat, a lot of people were debating on whether it was Oscar's fault or not. Chandler, McLaren posted a picture. I know you follow it on Instagram just like I do. It was of Oscar Piastri sending it up the inside. Carlos Sainz definitely had position in this picture, right? A lot of people are debating on whether Oscar Piastri actually stood a chance of making the corner or not, or if he should have backed out and got behind Carlos Sainz. What is your opinion on this? Do you think it's Oscar's fault that he actually got hit, or do you think it was Carlos's fault because he hit him?
So here's what I will say is that this picture, I'm looking at the picture right now just to give my reference, is that if you just look at Oscar's car, it looks like Oscar's about to plow through the cameraman. That being said, if you look at the positioning of Carlos's car, it's almost like if you go about another frame past this, the Carlos's left wheel is going to be touching that line. So he's already pinching pretty hard. The only thing that I also noticed that makes me think of like Carlos definitely could have, had room is that it looks as if you could fit maybe not an entire F1 car, but you could fit like half the body of an F1 car in between him and Lewis in the Mercedes that's right next to him. So Carlos left no space. Oscar was going for a gap that I feel like had this played out where had Carlos left a little bit of room and then, had he gotten nicked and all that stuff, it's like, well, it's a real racing incident. Now, and I also before I dive any further, I think there's a lot more leeway on lap 1, turn 1. Because of all the chaos of the cars being stacked up. So trust me when I'm saying I'm not really like upset. Like it's not a bad decision. It's like whenever it's like no further investigation, not upset with that. It's just an unfortunate happening. It happens. I do think that Carlos had room. I feel like Carlos knew he had room, but just them Ferraris, they're a little scared of the McLaren starting to gain some ground on them. So
the big thing is that I think a lot of people are overlooking is that Carlos Sainz locked up his brakes, right? He locked up his brakes, and that's why he kept moving closer towards Oscar Piastri. I'm a McLaren fan, but I think that Carlos Sainz locking up his brakes, yes, it's his fault that he locks his brakes up, right? I'm not debating that or not, but I'm debating the fact that I don't know if he would have gone over to where he did if his brakes weren't locked up. If he was able to stop, would he have tried to undercut? Do a crossover move? I don't know.
No.
Or would they have hit regardless? You can't really, it's hard to determine that, right? The big thing is that Oscar Piastri retired, right? So lap 1, see ya, you're done. Well, we said earlier that Carlos Sainz had a huge ass hole in his side pod. Like it was bigger than the Checo Perez one. I mean, I think I heard on the radio, what was it, Pat? Like 15% of aero damage or something like that.
Something ridiculous. And
it was
Carlos even knew that, his car was immediately way slower, and Ferrari was like, nope, we're gonna keep going, bro. Like,
they have fun out there. Monty Python, like the Black Knight of like, it's a flesh wound. Like,
they kept him out till like lap 24, 26, something like that. It's like, what are you gaining from this? There's no point in this, but that was the only major thing that happened during the race. There really wasn't too much else to talk about. I mean, Max ran away with it. That was it. Checo, he worked his way up. He didn't do what he's been doing. He ran a good race, was a good second fiddle, right, Chan?
So something actually on that, while we're talking about Checo, we've all been talking about how, is this in Checo's head? Is it something wrong with the car? What could it be? And Helmut Marko actually had come out and said that Sergio Perez now finally understands that he is not going to win a world championship. And that whole statement just tells me that I think that they finally sat down at Red Bull and had Checo just take a reality check and understand that you are not going to beat Max because nobody else is going to beat Max in conditions like this. He's quite literally untouchable, even by Lewis. I think that is something going forward that we may see Checo improve a lot. Just because we've seen before where if he has mental issues, like say when he was having troubles thinking, oh, am I going to get a contract extension at Red Bull, et cetera, he stopped performing and then suddenly signs a new contract, back to second on the grid. And I definitely think that we're going to see a resurgence from him. I hope we do, because I'm tired of watching him perform like dog shit. But I definitely think there's been a big internal discussion at Red Bull that, hey, we're not, expecting you to do something crazy because we wouldn't expect anybody to.
So for you guys listening, remember what Pat said, because here in a little bit, I'm going to disagree with it. We'll get to that in a little bit, but that was the entire race, right? So Max finished first, Checo came in second, and in third place was Charles Leclerc. Ferrari not fucking up their strategy or qualifying or the race. Who would have thought?
Surprise.
Yeah, crazy. That was it for the Belgian Grand Prix. So I was excited, right? Like McLaren didn't win. Lando didn't get second. Oscar didn't get second.
Lando still points seventh out of that with the setup McLaren had. All in all, 6 points. Plus you throw Oscar's 8 points from the sprint. It's almost Oscar's 8 points for the sprint is essentially McLaren finishing 6-7 in the race, which based off the setup and a dry run, I'll take it.
I mean, not honestly, not bad. It's not amazing. It's not, a second and fourth or third and fourth place, but it works, You
didn't lose too much ground to the Ferrari.
Yeah. Speaking of losing, you guys suck again. The second week in a row, you guys literally are dog water.
Suck my ass. Suck my ass.
I hope this doesn't backfire on you. I won the predictions yet again. For you guys listening, last episode, I had guessed Lewis Hamilton to become the highest placed finisher other than Max Verstappen. Well, we already said Checo got second. Charles Leclerc got third. Lewis got fourth. He definitely beat these two guys. So, Chan, who did you pick?
One of the McLarens. I can't remember this time.
You picked Lando.
You picked Lando, yeah.
Okay, seventh is better than 20th.
You picked the guy with the rain setup who was racing in the dry. So that's a good pick for you.
Whenever we recorded, so
look up the fucking Weather Channel or something next time, Buckaroo. Pat, so I was first. Chandler was second or third?
Third. I picked George because you picked Lewis, and I wanted Lewis.
Oh, because I won last week, I got to pick first.
Even
this
you
week.
Didn't even know how Lewis ended up where he did. He was like 20 seconds ahead of Fernando.
Let's not forget that I wanted either of the Mercedes drivers, and that would have put me better than where I finished at.
Well, okay, that's a personal problem for you.
Yeah, well, both of you guys suck. If you wanted to pick first,
I'm
then
just
you
saying
should win.
We can keep score. We can keep score. We're going to
go back and for you viewers, we're going to go back and we're going to tally up the actual totals right now onto who is actually leading the predictions. It's got to be me because these guys suck.
Yeah. Okay. So you're 1 point ahead of me.
Easy money.
Yeah. Okay.
Easy money.
Okay, pal.
So moving forward, we said this is going into the summer break, right? It's a month-long break. There's no race to predict. We are going to predict some silly season activities, some things that might happen, that kind of thing. We're just going to do a quick prediction, and then our next podcast is going to be in a couple weeks. We're going to talk about those predictions and if they've come to fruition or not, right? It doesn't matter which order we're going in, because since I make the rules up, since I'm the host, I'm going to save the picking order for the actual race because I have that power and I edit the videos. So what we're going to do is, Chandler, you go first. Give me one thing that you think is going to happen during silly season during this month off.
So this is weird. So, like my prediction is I have a driver who has raced his tail off in the racecraft that he's in. He's going to get a promotion. I just don't know where he fits into a promotion. But I feel like Alex Albon is worthy of getting a promotion to somewhere. Now, where he fits in.
What is your silly season prediction?
My prediction is that Kevin Magnussen will be announced that he's done at Haas at the end of the season. And in a second part of that Valtteri Bottas will replace him at Haas. Kevin hasn't been performing, just had another kid, getting destroyed by Hulkenberg, who literally took a year off. And I don't quite think that Valtteri is the best fit for Alfa Romeo. And I definitely think that Haas would be looking to pick somebody else out of F1.
So I definitely agree with both of y'all's silly season picks, right? Something's going to happen with Alex. I like your Haas picks. My pick actually is along the lines of Haas, but it has nothing to do with the drivers. I think Gunther Steiner is going to be announced. He's out of Haas, right? Like, I think the person we talked about earlier is going to be the guy replacing him. I think Otmar is going to be the new team principal of Haas Motorsports because Gene Haas, I mean, Gunther's been there forever, and what do they have to show for it? So I think something's going to happen major there, whether that's Mattia Binotto going to Haas or Otmar or someone higher up is definitely going to there. So that was our quick silly season picks. Keep in mind, in a couple weeks, we are going to have an episode talking all about silly season, what has happened, what could happen, and making our predictions for the next Formula One race. This was the Belgian Grand Prix coming from Spa. I'm Kyle. I'm here with Patrick and Chandler. As always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.